Good evening and welcome. We are back again for the Canberra AWS user group in April 2020. My name is Brian Farnhill, and as I'm hearing an echo of myself from another tab, so I'm just closing that. Off to a great start. Been learning a lot about Twitch the last month or so, but bear with us. So tonight we're going to take you through a bunch of content in the same format as we always do. I can drive PowerPoint. I'm winning tonight. All right, so the agenda for the evening. We're going to talk about some of the things that are new in AWS this month. I've got a little bit of an update about online training and what's happening with training courses that you would normally do in classroom. We've got a rundown of some of the white paper updates. And then our main presentation for the evening is John Hildebrandt and James Kingsmill, going through the protected on AWS update. So okay. Excellent. Okay, I can hear myself now. Life is good. Audio's back. That was a fantastic start. Let's call that worst case scenario. That one's out of the way, and we'll move on. So we'll dive straight into the what's new in AWS this month. And I am getting audio problems. Okay, I feel like I'm still going. This is going really well. So new updates in AWS this month, 121 so far. Which, if you're charting them out like we tend to do each month, looks a little. So here's a bit of a run through my top 10 for the month. The first one here is update to the Elastic file system. So basically what has happened here is there's a 400% increase in read performance. And yeah, no, give me a moment while I see what I can do with this. Okay. Looks like my wide network is back in. So let's just see how this goes. So as I was saying, the Elastic file system has got a 400% increase in read operations for the general purpose file systems. So this is really cool because it's performance for nothing. If you're using EFS, you're going to get this upgrade where you'll see your read performance uplift and it won't cost you anything and you won't need to do anything. So that's a great win. Next, I've got CloudWatch Contributor Insights for DynamoDB. So what this is it lets you analyze the performance of your DynamoDB tables to look for the most actively used keys. So this is really important in understanding performance as far as how like partitions go, as well as how your application is being used by your users. So these metrics are now the metrics are available with DynamoDB, and you can go and turn those on, and that's generally available now. This one's big for Australia and New Zealand. So sellers, consulting partners, and data providers from Australia and New Zealand can now list in the AWS Data Exchange and can also use the AWS Marketplace. So look, hearing this audio still chokes, so I'm just going to kill the video for a moment. The audio altogether. So apparently the audio dies when I turn the video off. That's spectacular. Okay. Cool. So I'm going to go back to the start of the slide and explain this again. So the AWS Launch Wizard now supports deployment of HANA-based SAP applications. So what this means is that you can deploy a templated environment that's already configured for you with a few mouse clicks. So we previously had this for Microsoft SQL Server for always-on availability groups, but now we've got the ability to go through and do it for SAP HANA as well. So a really great way to get in and start testing your applications in the cloud. Amazon Textract now reads checkboxes and other selection elements more accurately. So Textract, if you haven't seen it, is an OCR service, and you can feed various types of documents in, and it reads it a little more intelligently than just looking at the characters on a page. So we can see that there's a table, for example, and give you that structure back so you can interpret the table. It also has the ability to read, is checkbox ticked or is it unticked? And the accuracy of that has been improved. So again, another update where you get something for nothing. Snowball got a few updates this month. So the Snowball service, if you've not heard of it, is a hardware device where you can request one, it ships to your location, you can load your data onto it, and then send it back to get it into the cloud, because you might not have the internet bandwidth to upload, as I apparently also do not have tonight. So what this means for OpsHub, though, is it's a client application for managing your snowballs. So previously, you would have to use a CLI or REST API, and now you've got the ability to download OpsHub and manage snowballs. The EC2 image builder now supports a bunch of additional Linux distributions. So image builder is a way to maintain like a SOE or a gold image, where you can define the scripts that set it up, the tests that validate it, and then roll it out as AMI, as well as extract it to use in other platforms. So previously it had support for Windows Server and Amazon Linux. Now we've got support for Ubuntu, Red Hat, CentOS, and SUSE Enterprise. Another SQL Server on RDS update, and it's that now it's got support for SQL Server analysis services. So this is one where we listen to a lot of customer feedback saying that customers were having to run separate analysis services anyway, and so RDS sort of didn't meet the needs of what they were looking to do. Now you can tick a box and have analysis services available on your RDS instances, so that you can do those cube analysis jobs and all those other data mechanisms without having to install, configure, and patch analysis services. And the last update for this month is that Secrets Manager is now supported by AWS Config. So Config lets you track configuration changes to your resources in AWS. And what the Secrets Manager configuration does is it lets you get a view of when things like the auto rotation has changed, or any other metadata about your secrets have changed. And you can then define rules and alerts to make sure that appropriate practices are being applied to your secrets. Okay, so classroom training. Typically speaking, at this point of the intro, I would be talking about the training courses that you could go and do in Canberra. Now, given the current situation around the world, there's not a lot of those happening in person. So what's happening, though, is a lot of virtual classrooms. So if you go to aws.training, and I haven't listed them all individually because there are heaps more than would normally run in person in Canberra, you can go through and find training courses that are being done as virtual classrooms and that fit your schedule. So I had a look this afternoon, and there's a lot of courses there that are lining up in the Sydney and Melbourne time zone. But if you feel like doing courses in the middle of the night, go and pick something in US or London or wherever suits your particular time needs. White papers. So there's been a few updates. Two I want to call out. The Snowball Edge Data Migration Guide. So this has essentially been updated to reflect that OpsHub that I talked about earlier. The second one is the Machine Learning Lens for Well-Architected Framework. So if you haven't heard about the AWS Well-Architected Framework, essentially what it is a way of assessing and validating your workloads against best practices for cloud-based platforms. Now, the Machine Learning Lens asks some questions that are specific of machine learning workloads. So how are you managing things like your models, and how you're automating your training and cost optimizing and performance optimizing these machine learning workloads? So again, all of the links will be in here, and we'll share the slides through Meetup. All right, I'm going to wrap up before my internet connection caused me any more trouble and get ready to hand over to our presenters. But before I do, what do you guys want to hear? So we're always super keen to hear from the group. Assuming I've done Twitch right, there's a suggestion box at the bottom of the page here if you want to drop something in there, or send us a message through Meetup. Also, we're still very interested in your feedback. So feedback is done through Meetup, and you should get an email or an app notification at some point tomorrow saying, hey, what do you think? So again, I check it every month, and we use it to help inform decisions about what content we bring to you, sort of what was good, what was not, and make sure that this group is as good as it can be for you. And last, but certainly not least, friends don't let friends miss the AWS user. So again, word of mouth is always our best way to get people aware of the group. So if you enjoyed what you saw this evening, please share the links around, let people know. So now I'm going to hand over to our two presenters, John Hildebrandt and James Kingsmill, and we'll see how this internet bandwidth holds up. John, hello. You want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, John Hildebrandt here. I'm the head of AWS Security Assurance for Australia and New Zealand. I'm based in Canberra, Australia. So excited to be here tonight to talk about our protected story.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And Mr. Kingsmill, can I get an intro?
Hey, everyone. My name is James Kingsmill, and I'm a solutions architect with the public sector team, also based in Canberra, Australia. Great to be here tonight.
Excellent. So on that note, assuming this is all behaving in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to hand over to John, who should be able to start sharing his screen, and we'll get into the main presentation.
Great. And do you want me to turn off my video or leave it on?
Look, let's just go with it for the time being. We'll see how we go.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. Like I said, I'm talking about how you can go about running protected workloads on AWS and the journey that we've had to receive the certification and to audit our platform at that level. So before I get started, I just wanted to go through a few acronyms for those that may not be familiar with the agencies and processes involved in Australia. So the Australian Cyber Security Centre, or ACSC, is the agency that builds a control framework for government information security. And that control framework is a thing called the Australian Government Information Security Manual, or ISM. And basically a very large list of controls that government must adhere to in building systems. And to assess against those controls, the Cyber Centre have built a program called the IRAP, or Information Security Registered Assessors Program. This is a program where they certify independent third parties to audit a solution or a platform against those ISM controls. And then finally, the ACSC are part of the Australian Signals Directorate. You may have heard of, they're part of the Department of Defence, so they're responsible for both protective information security and also signals intelligence aspects. So why is it important to have this protected audit and be able to run systems that are protected? Well, what this allows is it allows you to leverage AWS to process data of high national interest and high business impact. So personal information or government information of high business impact. With our audit and at Protected, it's not just limited to, say, basic infrastructure as services, but we have a broad range of services available. And what this means is that you can start to reimagine and look at different possibilities to deliver your systems at the protected level, but still get the benefit of a broad set of services. So not just basic virtual machines, but looking at containers, serverless applications, and other sort of high-level services. And so what this means in the end for your customers, the citizens, is that they can get the advantage of improve services and outcomes for them. So our protected journey, the first public recognition of that was back in January 2019. So this was over a year now. This is when we announced with the Australian Cyber Security Centre that 42 of our services were certified to process protected data. Now, the process we took to get to that point was quite a long and detailed one. There were no shortcuts in getting on this journey to protected. And this slide is showing you a bit of a mud map of how the approach was done. So the first parts of these first two sections of this slide is basically where we hired an IRAP assessor. So this was about 18 months before that January 2019 date. And the IRAP assessor conducted what they first do is what's called a phase 1 assessment. That's primarily document-centric. They're looking at our compliance documentation, our security documentation, and looking at what the controls that we've claimed that we're putting in place for the platform. They then move on to the second phase, phase 2, and which is where they're actually validating that those controls are in place. So that involves additional documentation. It involved things like going to Seattle to work with our security teams and subject matter experts to understand what controls are being put in place, how the systems worked. It also involved getting evidence items to prove those controls were in place. And also it involved physical audit aspects, so going to data centres both in Sydney and Canberra as part of this process. The output of this process then was what's called a Stage 2 IRAP report. That was then delivered to us and we provided that to the Cyber Centre. They examined that report and then they had some deep dive workshops with us late in 2018, asked some additional questions, and then they signed off on the certification and listed us on the CCSL, which was in place at that time. So that was where we were at 2019 with 42 services. So we didn't stop there, of course. We've continued to iterate and build on that. So we actually have undertaken another audit round late last year that we announced at January 2020, where we now have Stage 2 IRAP report of 64 services that are in scope of that audit at the protected level. So just to give you an idea of what the breadth of services are, this is just showing in this diagram now the scope of services that was in that original 42. So you can see here, it's not just, like I was saying, it's not just compute, storage and networking here, but quite a breadth of services. So we've got things in the big data analytics space with streaming data, with elastic MapReduce, for example. Within compute, it's not just about virtual machines, but also things like container-based processing and function as a service with Lambda. We've got services to help you integrate, build application integration. We've got end user computing with desktop as a service and file sharing. And then within the database area, it's not just about relational databases, but also things like data warehouses with Redshift, NoSQL with DynamoDB, and so on. And then we've got quite a range of security and compliance services and management and governance services that you use to help secure and manage your applications. Particularly important to look at these when you're building at the protected level. So that was at January 2019, and then at January this year, you can see we've added quite a bit of depth in each of those categories, and also introduced some new categories of services here. So we have services like machine learning category with Amazon SageMaker. So you can start doing things like building your own machine learning models and deploying those through the SageMaker service. We're supporting things like Internet of Things use cases now with IoT Core. A range of additional analytics services, so things like Athena to allow you to start doing queries directly on S3 buckets and so on. And across all the other categories there, you can see there's a number of services have been added. So one of the questions I often get is then, is there some sort of checkbox or enclave that I need to go to or pay a bit of extra or something to get these protected versions of these services? And the great news on AWS is that there is no difference. The same services that you're already using today in the Sydney region are the same services that are in scope of this protected level audit. So for the audit in January, the end of January this year, this is what I'm showing here now in this slide is the process that we took to get that audit out the door with that stage 2 IRAP report. So you can see here, it looks very similar with sort of a key difference at the end that I'll drill into. So again, it was the same sort of process at phase 1, phase 2 IRAP audit. We hired an IRAP assessor. They did the phase 1 document review. They then did the deep dive drill down with our security teams and SMEs travelled to Seattle for that. Examined various evidence of our use of various controls so that they were assured that we had those appropriate controls in place. They also did the physical audit process again, sampling again different data center areas within the Sydney region. And so the output again was what's called a stage 2 IRAP report. We've made that available in AWS Artifact as of January this year. Now, as per the Digital Transformation Agency's secure cloud policy, agencies can then take that and conduct their own certification of process to certify their system to be able to process protected data. And in fact, after January this year, then in March, the reason the ACSC wasn't involved in that audit was because the CCSL process was under review. And as March this year, they've announced now, they did a joint announcement between the DTA and the ASD, which I've got the link to that here. And they made these 4 key recommendations. So they were closing the CSCP program, which is what delivers the CCSL. And they're replacing that by the ability for agencies to self-certify as per DTA guidelines. They're also establishing a consultative forum that we're already engaged with to develop cloud security guidelines for agencies to leverage. We're also talked about growing and enhancing the IRAP program, because as you can imagine, with the growth of different vendor providers and with the growth of agencies wanting to do IRAP certification audits, the need for that's going to grow. And then they updated some of the guidelines to remove references to the CCSL. If I just continue on through the statement, I just want to highlight this point here that they made. The first line of this was the Commonwealth entities continue to be responsible for their own assurance and risk management activities. So the key word there is continue. It's really not a change. What this is saying is that agencies are responsible for their own certification and compliance activities. That's really been the case before there was a CCSL. It was the case when there was a CCSL, and it's now going to be the case after the CCSL is retired in June this year. They also highlighted the use of some of their other guidance documentation, so things like cloud computing security considerations, cloud computing security for tenants in their recommendations. So I've talked now about what we've been through to audit and the controls that we put in place to allow our platform to be assessed and protected, and the audit that we've gone through to prove that. And now I want to sort of pivot to the shared responsibility model. You've probably seen this if you've been to an AWS talk before. So we're responsible for security of the cloud. We're putting controls in place there at the below the line there on our services that we offer. We've given you validation of that through things like the IRAP audit and our other compliance programs. But of course, when you run a workload in the cloud, you then need to think about how you configure those services to operate in a secure fashion. So for example, if you spin up an EC2 instance, you are the full admin on that. So you decide whether or not to patch, maintain that, whether to encrypt data and those types of decisions. And now we give you a variety of information to help you with that on both sides of this story. So for understanding the security of the cloud, you can look to our cloud compliance landing pages. You can download the Stage 2 IRAP report on AWS Artifact on a self-service basis to understand the controls we put in place. And then to help you build in the cloud, there's a variety of guidance on our website, such as the well-architected documentation. But one of the artifacts I wanted to focus on, and that James will actually show you incantation of this later on, is within our protected documentation, we've included reference architecture. So this was developed by a team of solution architects. It's available as part of the IRAP protected package on AWS Artifact. And what it really is just an example application, a fairly straightforward intranet web app to help customers get started on this journey. It leverages concepts from our shared responsibility model, our cloud adoption framework, and well-architected framework. So it's the things that we're recommending in there aren't going to be surprises to you. And we're keen to get feedback on this, as we move forward from customers that are using it. So this just shows you this diagram now is one of the key diagrams within that reference architecture. It just shows the application that we've used as an example. So it's a fairly standard 3-tier web app, load balancing tier, web tier, database tier, with a direct connect back to your on-premises environment to access the intranet application. But then within the reference architecture and within describing all the controls and lockdowns we're putting in place to meet some of the recommendations from the protected requirements in the ISM. This is the second sort of key diagram within the reference architecture, and this gives you the multi-account context that applications typically have. So within here, you'll see down in the sort of near the bottom right, there's that workloads. That's the previous diagram. But what it's doing here is showing that in a typical large organization, you're going to be running a multi-account architecture. So some of you might have heard of things like landing zones, those sort of concepts. And this is just highlighting where you might be using those to do various other security functions, such as, say, a SecOps account and so on. Also want to sort of highlight here that this guidance within the reference architecture aligns very closely with things like our existing cloud adoption framework guidance. So this is showing the 5 sort of pillars within our security perspective within the CAF: identity, detective controls, infrastructure security, data protection, and incident response. And then below that, we're actually mapping to some of the services have been highlighted within the reference architecture to meet the requirements in each of those pillars. So things like using IAM with MFA for identity and access management, using directory services to provide a federated identity within the application. On the detective controls, using things like our logging and monitoring services, like CloudWatch logs, CloudTrail for understanding what's going on with all the API calls within the accounts, turning those sort of things on in all accounts and all regions. And in fact, one of our services, Guard Duty, was specifically called out by the Cyber Centre as they were recommending to turn that on for all accounts in all regions as part of this best practice. Within information security, so that's doing things like providing the patching management of those servers, protecting your network environment with things like your firewalls, security groups within VPCs, and so on. And then within the data protection space, so this addresses some of the key areas of encryption at rest, encryption in transit. Again, things that are pretty standard sort of concepts from a security point of view, but just making those real within the reference architecture. So one of the key recommendations from the IRAP audit was to enable KMS encryption on all supported services for protected workloads, and to use a customer managed key, for example. And then for encryption in transit, in the reference architecture, we leverage things like VPN across direct connection. And then finally, the incident response one, that really highlights things like the use of a need to focus on automation to remove the sort of possibility of human error as much as possible and react quickly to changes within the environment. So the examples there are things like being able to use config rules to actually verify continuously that you are doing, say, the encryption that you were saying that you were using. So if someone turns off KMS encryption, you can immediately, say, alert to that, or even use a Lambda function to correct that problem. There's a few other points that aren't in the diagrams that you'll also see within the reference architecture. So things like using separate accounts to gather log information. So this gets back to that point about having a multi-account architecture. Using things like automation, Lambda functions to react to events within the environment. There's a recommendation there to have a business level or greater support enabled on all accounts. That gives you access to the full trusted advisor information and security data. And then just as with all your solutions in a department or agency system solutions, you should be, the logs from this solution should be being sent to the central logging solution that you've already got in place. So I've drilled down a bit into the protected reference architecture there. We've also providing quite a range of other guidance material that you can leverage to help you build secure solutions on AWS to meet government requirements. So as well as the reference architecture document, there's a protected quick start, which James is going to talk more about shortly. We've also provided standard responses to things like the ASD Cloud Considerations document, the Cyber Centre's tenants requirements and responses to those questions. And the Essential 8, which is something that's been very topical across government agencies recently. We have published a blog post that talks about the different approaches that you can use within AWS to meet the requirements and intent of the Essential 8 controls. And also, as well as those specific ones around Australian government requirements, don't forget our standard security guidance. So things like our cloud adoption framework, our well-architected security pillar, and even now we actually have most of the services now have a specific security page on a service-by-service basis. So it's a great resource to leverage. So in summary then, how do you leverage AWS to get a protected service out there? It's a fairly straightforward process that's summarized here. The first step is you should be going to AWS Artifact, downloading that IRAP protected package. That gives you access to the Stage 2 IRAP report that you can read and review to understand the controls that we put in place. It'll outline the scope of that audit and give you a good understanding of that. You can then use things like our protected reference architecture to help you get started. You'll then be building your system and designing against your requirements. You'll have a requirement to document that from a security point of view as part of your assessment. And then ultimately your certification authority, which is probably your agency security lead or CIO, would be the certification authority for your system to allow you to be running it protected and have a certified system. So call to action is, like I said, visit AWS Artifact, review that the protected package. Keen to get in feedback on the reference architecture, what else you'd like to see in those kind of guides. Also keen to get feedback on the scope of this audit. Currently we've got 64 services, regularly getting customers asking about other services and doing for future audits. So provide feedback and go build. And like I said, don't forget to leverage all the resources that are available to you. So I'll pause there before I move on to James, in case there's any sort of burning questions that coming in from the Chime channel. Was there anything that stood out, Brian?
As I panically take myself off mute. No, it looks like we caught everything in there, and James put a link in for one of the statements that got shared as well. Okay,
so I'll hand over to James now. He's going to be talking about the kind of making that reference architecture real, executable, and while that's going on, I'll keep an eye on the chat if people do have any other comments or questions.
Fantastic, thanks, John. Hey everyone, my name's James, and I'm going to be doing a deployment of the IRAP Protected Quick Start that John was just talking about. So before I do anything, I just want to get something going here. So what I'm going to do real quick is actually start a deployment of this stack. So just trust me that this is going to do it. So we're just creating a stack here in CloudFormation. Last time I ran this, it took 31 minutes. So I'm hoping this is going to be done in time for us to see it live at the end of this presentation. Cool. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get started. So there are a few things that we're going to be talking about today. So the format that we're going to take is I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Quick Start, what it is, what it builds, where it came from. Next, I'm going to go into things to consider. So these are things that aren't necessarily, I wouldn't describe them as gotchas, but they're things to be aware of when you're building this. We'll talk about some of the prerequisites for building the system, and there aren't too many of them, but I just want to make sure you're aware of them. We'll do a git clone of the repository and walk through the templates. At a pretty high level, they get into a lot of detail, but we'll talk through some of the main components, and then we'll actually go through and see how this deployment went, and I'll talk you through how to do your deployment of your own. Awesome, so let's dive into it. So what is the IRAP Protected Quick Start? So here it is on GitHub, and I'm going to post that link into Twitch as well, so I'm hoping you can see that. So it's the Quick Start Compliance IRAP Protected. And there are a few things that I want to call out here. So the first one, if we scroll a little bit down, here's the reference architecture. And you might have seen a version of that from the slides that John was sharing before. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a second. The other thing I want to call out down here is the deployment guide. So that's going to be your best friend when you're actually deploying this thing. I'll hop in there in a second, but let's talk about what this thing actually builds. So what we're building, and John kind of talked about it briefly before, this is a pretty simple 3-tier web application. So it's in a VPC. It deploys to the Sydney region by default, of course. And it deploys across 3 availability zones within the Sydney region. And that's not in this diagram, but it is across those 3 AZs. And one of the things that we've got in our VPC, we've got different subnets. You can see those here, the Lambda subnet, the public subnet, web app subnet, and database subnet. You've got different security groups. We've also got a whole lot of network access control lists and ACLs set up. So going into the different layers here, in our load balancer layer, we've got a network load balancer, an NLB, and an application load balancer, our ALB. And that's that might seem a little bit counterintuitive initially. I'll go into detail in a few minutes about why we're doing that. There's a good reason. Behind that, we've got our auto-scaling group of web servers. And these are just running a single page, a really simple application. It's the kind of single page web app you would expect from a back-end engineer. It's not pretty, but it does the job. It's in an auto-scaling group, of course. So So if you need to scale up, scale down, that's going to do that for you. The app server metrics are being sent to CloudWatch. So it's sending metrics for things like CPU and disk, memory, network. Those are going to CloudWatch metrics. And our logs from our web server, from Apache HTTPD, those are being sent to CloudWatch logs. And so you can see CloudWatch included over here as well. In our database layout, this is an Amazon RDS instance. It's multi-AZ, and that's got a connection to the security group, the web app security group. The other things I want to call out in here, so AWS WAF, so Web Application Firewall. This is set up with example OWASP top 10 rules, and that's connected to the application load balancer. This Lambda function down here, that's for doing this NLB ALB sync. And like I said, I'm going to go into details on that in a second. It looks like there's a question here from Wally Sadie as well. John, that one's for you. Talking about CCSL. Cool. So the WAF rules, the OWASP top 10, that's connected to the ALB. The Lambda function to hook up our NLB to our ALB, and I'll talk about that in a second. We're using KMS, the key management service for encryption. We've got IAM, Identity Access Management, of course. That's setting up roles for our Lambda function. So that's giving permissions to our Lambda function to make changes to our load balancers. It's giving them the ability to instantiate themselves in a VPC. It's giving them access to S3 and to CloudWatch as well. And the IAM role that's attached to our auto-scaling group, that's to give it that access to CloudWatch too.
I think James's feed may have just frozen there a little. At least it's not just me who's having internet connections this evening.
Can you hear me on the stream as well?
Yeah, sure, okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to, while we've got a pause, just there was one question about what's going forward post CCSL. Yeah, we continue to invest in the IRAP program, and customers continue to ask us for those phase 2 reports. So the common question is, can you add Service X to those, to the scope? Yeah, and so we'll be continuing to make that investment while customers use those as pieces of evidence.
Hey, I'm back. Can you guys hear me now?
Sure can.
Fantastic. Okay. Yep. It's freezing in Canberra tonight. Cool. So where were we up to? We were talking about guard duty. Guard duty is one of my favorite services. So what I might do is actually open up the console and have a look at guard duty. Actually, let's have a look and see how our stack is going. So we'll hop into CloudFormation first, and you can see our protected CloudFormation stack is deploying. It's deploying a whole bunch of substacks as well. Cool. So we'll just leave that to simmer on the boil for a little while. We'll go up to Services and open up Guard Duty in a new tab. This is just to give you an idea of what Guard Duty looks like, because if you don't have it switched on your accounts at the moment, I highly recommend you go and turn it on. It's going to give you awesome insights. This is pretty empty. I'm not running a whole lot in this account, but it's telling me that one of the ports on my EC2 instance is getting probed. So you can see it's in the Sydney region. It's this EC2 instance, and it's been getting probed. It's been getting probed from Honduras. Interesting. So it gives you a whole bunch of insights like this, and it lets you know whether they're low, medium, high, and it's something that I really highly recommend you switch on. It's super cheap as well. So this is the estimated daily cost for the last 30 days. It's a single cent per day. So that's about 30 cents per month. And I think they round that number's been rounded up as well. So that's Guard Duty, which is enabled as part of this solution as well. So the other thing that I wanted to call out was this deployment guide. We'll open that up here. And this is a document. It's not huge. It's only about, 14, 15 pages. And it just gives you a bunch of information about how to get started. So a lot of what I'm telling you today, that's summarized here in the deployment guide. So this is going to be super useful. Cool. John mentioned before that this architecture, this one that we're seeing here, this is something that is, this isn't just come out of thin air. This is something that is the reference architecture that was included with the IRAP protected package. So if you want to see more information about that, what I recommend you do, and John talked about this as well, is if you go back to your AWS console, do a search for artifact, AWS compliance reports and agreements. Let's open that one up. So AWS artifact is going to include a whole bunch of compliance and security documents. It's got things like APRA, it's got FedRAMP if you're interested in that, ISO 27001. But what we're interested in, if I do a search for IRAP, the IRAP protected package. You want to get this artifact. It'll ask you to just click OK to signing an agreement, and then you can download that. So I highly recommend downloading that and having a look as well. I'm not going to download that now because I've already got a copy, of course. It's printed out and beside my bed. Okay, cool. So let's move on. That was the kind of quick start overview. Let's move on into things to consider. So things to consider about this. The first one, guard duty, like I said, is awesome. You want to make sure that that there isn't a pre-existing guard duty detector enabled in your account, or if there is, what you want to do is disable it. So this is going into the actual template. One of the parameters that we've got here under parameters is enable guard duty. So if you've already got guard duty enabled in your account, you want to set that parameter to false. If you don't, then this template will try to create an additional guard duty detector, and the two are going to conflict with one another, and your deployment's going to fail. So just be aware of that, and in your parameters file, just set that to false if you've got guard duty already enabled. The second one to be aware of is in the quick start, there's an internet gateway here. And so if you compare that with the reference architecture, that's a little bit different. So in the reference architecture, you've got a VPN connected to a direct connect, which is going back to the customer's data center. In this example, that's not really the kind of thing that we can automate. So just to make a quick start that was actually going to bring up something that you could test, that was going to be usable straight off the bat, we included an internet gateway in here. So if you want to deploy this and use it to host protected data, what you want to do is remove that internet gateway and replace in your route tables for your VPC, for your virtual private cloud. You want to replace those, the routes that would have gone to the internet gateway, you want to replace that with the next hop in your architecture. So whether that's a VPG, a VPN connection, or maybe that's a transit gateway or a transit VPC, you just want to replace that route. The next thing to be aware of, so remember how I said before about how there's an NLB and an ALB here, and what the heck is that all about? So this is so that if you want to share this service, if you want to share it with another account that you own, okay, that's pretty easy. Like you hook it up to a transit gateway or to your transit VPC and you share it between accounts. But what if you want to share it with an account that's not owned by you, and this service is disconnected from the internet? How do you do that? So what you can do with the network load balancer is that you can use a service called AWS Private Link. Oops, if I can spell. So you can set up Private Link on your NLB and share your service with AWS accounts, and it's not going to go over the internet. It's going to go securely on the Amazon network. So that's awesome if you want to share your system in that way. We've got another question here as well. Are you saying we couldn't use an internet gateway in a protected setup? that's a risk-based decision that agencies have got to make for themselves. So what I'm saying here is that as part of the reference architecture, that's not included in that. So maybe John can provide some more details in chat as well. Hope that answers your question, Chris. Cool. Okay. Awesome. So this can, well, that's an awesome thing to do if you want to expose, if you want to share your service with other AWS accounts using private link. It does make things a little bit complicated because you need to be able to sync the NLB and the ALB using this Lambda function. And what that...
And James's audio is gone. Right, you're back there, James. We just lost you for a few seconds.
Oh, cool. Okay. You can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think it looks like this call is using up a whole lot of CPU on my machine. So apologies, folks. I'll try to work with it. And if I drop out, my apologies. I'll try to fill in. So where we're up to with this. So this Lambda function is hooking up your ALB to your NLB. So it's taking the IP addresses, the dynamic IP addresses of your ALB, and it's setting them as the targets in your target group for your NLB, because your NLB is operating at layer 4 and your ALB is operating at layer 7. So that's that's an established pattern. And if you want more details, there's a link in the chat that you can use to check it out. A few other things to be aware of. So the root volume on your Linux instances, it's not encrypted. So what we've done is attached an encrypted EBS volume, and we're running our web server content off that. But it's a little bit tricky to do in CloudFormation. In CloudFormation that we're going to share to everyone, it's a bit tricky to define an encrypted AMI. So what you want to do, that's really easy for customers to do themselves. So what you want to do is just create an encrypted AMI and replace the AMI in your auto-scaling group with that AMI. And using EC2 Image Builder that Brian was talking about before, that might be a way to build an AMI as well. And then a couple of final points. So WAF here. So we're using WAF v1. So you might know that WAF v2 got announced recently. So what you might find is if you go to the console and have a look at WAF, let's open that up. What you might find if you deploy this architecture in your own account, and if you go to the WAF page, you might not see it in the standard set of web ACLs here. What you want to do is switch to AWS WAF Classic. So if you click on that, that'll take you to the Classic interface. You want to head down to Rules, and then what you'll see in Rules, it'll show global CloudFront rules by default. What we want is regional WAF rules. So we're deploying this in Sydney. So if you select that, that'll display the rules. It's just something that it can be a little bit, yeah, so cool. You can see these are starting to be created by our stack. So that's just something to be aware of. It might be a little bit tricky to find if you're not used to looking in the right spot. Cool. Okay, but the really important thing here is that you refer to the guidance in the package, in the IRAP protected package. So if you go to AWS Artifact and you download the IRAP protected package, that's going to give you a whole bunch of guidance like this. That's the really important thing to follow. So just make sure that you're kind of following along with that if you're actually using this system to store protected data. Awesome. Cool. So that's covered things, like I said, like just not quite gotchas, but just things to be aware of when you're deploying the system. Let's move on to prerequisites. So there aren't too many prereqs for this. There are probably two main ones. So the first one is you need to have a couple of IAMs. So let's open up IAM. And these IAM users, you're going to define them as owners. And so this stack creates a KMS key, and you need to be able to define who has the ability to administer that key and who has the ability to use that key. So what I've done here is I've got a user here, and I'm going to set that single user as the administrator and the user of the key. So it's you just want to make sure that you have at least one user in your account. The second thing that you want to do is you need an EC2 key pair. So if we head to EC2, and this key pair, it's going to give you the ability to instances. So if you head to EC2, head down to key. Just want to, so I've got the JK key pair. That's what I'm going to be using, and you want to make sure it's in the right region as well. And so what we can do is define those in our parameters file. So this is an example parameters file that we're going to have. We're going to define which availability zones this system is going to be deployed to. Here's our KMS admin, like I said. So this is the user that has the ability to administer the KMS key. KMS user, this is the user that has the ability to encrypt and decrypt. And I've set these as the same user just for simplicity's sake. It's best to have them as different users. There's an SNS email. So for our guard duty alerts, they're going to get sent to me. We're setting up a DB user. We're giving it a password. Our key pair name, this is that EC2 key pair that I showed here. And then because I already have guard duty enabled in this account, I'm setting enable guard duty to false. So that's an example parameters file. And so what I can do is to save you all the hassle of writing your own parameters file. Here's an example that you can use to start off with. And that link's going to expire in a week. That's just a pre-signed URL on S3. Awesome. Okay. So let's go through. I'm going to close some of these tabs. Let's go through and actually get this, do a git clone and see what this actually looks like. So I'm going to clone this repository. I'm going to pop back here. Let's go up a level and let's do a git clone of that URL. Okay, cool. So look. Am I back?
A little bit jittery, but mostly yes.
Okay, cool. So let's go in and have a look at one of these templates. So let's have a look at the IRAP protected YAML file. So this is where all the magic's happening. The master stack, the master YAML file, that's the root. So all that's doing is that's creating a couple of stacks. That's creating our VPC, and it's creating our IRAP protected. And what you can see here is that this is referring to the Quick Start S3 bucket. So we've included the IRAP protected YAML and the VPC YAML. So what you might want to do is, if you're deploying this yourself, you might want to replace these URLs with URLs that link to your own YAML files. So that's the master YAML. Let's have a look at the IRAP protected YAML. Let's go right up to the top. So there are a few things in here that I want to call out. So we've got our Aurora submodule. So this is what's deploying our Aurora database. And as you can see, it's referring to the Quick Start S3 bucket again. This is going to the Amazon Aurora MySQL example Quick Start. So that's the kind of the defined way to do Aurora. So we're just using that example. The other thing that I want to look at is the launch configuration. So the launch configuration is defining what our auto-scaling group looks like. So it's defining what our EC2 instances run on them. So you can see here what we're doing is we're configuring the CloudWatch agent. We're getting some questions. No, cool. It's configuring the CloudWatch agent, it's restarting the CloudWatch agent, and it's installing Apache HTTPD. And we've got a whole bunch of information down here about the different metrics that we're collecting. We're collecting logs. We're collecting CPU usage, memory usage, disk I/O, a whole bunch of different metrics, and we're sending those to CloudWatch. And then all we're doing here is installing HTTPD. So we're doing a yum install, and we're doing the most basic website possible. Welcome to your HTTP website. That's basically the equivalent of hello world. So that's the launch configuration. This is the update ALB function. So this is this Lambda function down here. And this is another one that we're pulling from the Quick Start S3 bucket. This is a predefined standard as well. So this is the populate NLB target group with ALB. So if you have a Google for that, then that's going to take you to that Quick Start. So this is registering the ALB to the network load balancer, like I mentioned. So it's a pretty hefty stack. It's not as big as some, but it can be a bit to get your head around. But that's it in a nutshell. And then of course we've got our VPC here, and starting at the top, it's pretty standard. We've got a bunch of parameters and metadata and conditions and a whole bunch of network ACLs as well. So if there's something, if you're having an issue, if you try to deploy this by yourself and deploy your own application on it and you're having connectivity issues, maybe have a look at the network ACLs, have a look at the security groups. It's fairly locked down. Awesome. Okay, cool. So let's have a look and see how our CloudFormation is going now. Create in progress. We started this at 22, so it should be getting close to done. So what I want to do now is walk you through how to actually deploy this yourself. So what you want to do is, first, you want to do an S3 copy of your templates master YAML, and you want to copy that just to a bucket that you own in your account. So once you've done that, the next step is that command that I ran earlier. So I'll actually walk us through it now. So we're doing an AWS CloudFormation. We're hitting the CloudFormation service, and we're doing a create stack. We're referring to the template URL of that master YAML S3 bucket that I just uploaded this master YAML to. We're giving it a stack name of protected CFN. We're passing in a parameters file. So that's this parameters file that I showed you before. This parameters file here. We're passing in that parameters file. And it needs a couple of capabilities as well. Because we've got nested stacks, we need an auto expand. And because it's creating IAM resources, those IAM roles that I pointed out to you before, it needs capability IAM. So that should be enough to get you started. So if we're talking about next steps, I would just encourage you to go build this. Be aware that it is going to create resources in your account that will exceed the free tier. So be aware that it's going to incur some cost. But I would encourage you to go and check it out and play with it and try to deploy your own application on this. Let's see if this is created yet. It looks like we might just be missing time. I think I went through this too quickly. Let's see, because one of the outputs that we've got from here is the URL. So what we want to do here is when this is created, this is going to give us the URL of our application. And we're going to be able to open that, and we're going to be able to see the welcome to your HTTPD website. In beautiful HTML H1, we're going to be able to see that on our website here. But if that hasn't created yet, oh, maybe we're so close. It's so close. What else are we waiting on? We're waiting on, oh my God. I think this might be so close to being done. But I don't want to leave you guys sitting here looking at an empty screen. So trust me that when I say that when this output is done, then that should give us the link to our website. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. There we go. Oh my God, one of the Substacks actually created. So there we go. Welcome to our HTTPD website in beautiful HTML, unstyled H1. There you go. So the next step is just make sure if you deploy this yourself, make sure to go in and delete it because it is going to incur costs. And yes, great success. I will share the link. I'll share the link so that people know that I'm not actually cheating. This isn't on my machine. This is an actual link on the internet. All right. So that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the chat, or if you were paying attention to my parameters, Jason, you would have seen my email address here. So you can shoot me an email, or you can raise an issue on the GitHub page. If you find an issue with this, or if you have a suggestion, I'd love to hear from you. So please raise an issue if you find one. But thanks everyone for watching, and I'm going to hand back to Brian.
Excellent. So there's my oversized Skype icon taking up the background. So clearly we've learned a few things about how Skype works with this broadcasting software. It's going to move that out of the way and resize Kingsmill here a little. And you can see the thing that says, send your feedback. Don't bother telling me that the internet connection was bad. I've picked up on that. What I will do, though, is I will take a moment to thank our two presenters, John and James. Thank you for participating in this wonderful live streamed experiment as we continue to learn month on month how to make this a better thing for everyone who's watching. So we'll hang about and keep an eye on the chat for another little while if anyone's got any questions. But otherwise, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back again next month. I'll sort out my internet by then, I promise. And we'll see you with some more AWS content then. Thank you for watching, everyone.
Bye.